Welcome into the GoVols247 Podcast, a Monday, July 28th edition of the podcast. It is officially football time in Tennessee. Tennessee begins fall camp on Wednesday, but they are going to meet with the media for its local media day on Tuesday. I believe that'll be 2 weeks to the date after they had SEC media days, so they got to field all of the national media questions, and now they'll be bombarded with questions from the local media on Tuesday before beginning fall camp on Wednesday. Practice number one is on Wednesday morning. Josh Heupel sticking to his morning practice routine this fall, at least at the start of it. And there will be many interviews this week, especially tomorrow with media day. And then Josh Heupel will speak after practice number one on Wednesday. And then we'll get essentially a different position coach or coordinator each day from there on out. And it's usually the players that speak are tied to the position coach or coordinator that speaks, but that can fluctuate. Sometimes players show up and sometimes they don't. So we'll just see, but we'll have all that coverage for you at GoVols247.com. On this edition of the podcast, I am Ben McKee, and I am joined by Patrick Brown and Ryan Callahan. I know the guys are doing well, ready to get going this football season. Ryan, we'll start with the hot topic in the land of Tennessee football right now, and that is Boo Carter. What are you hearing in terms of what is the latest with him as fall practice starts less than 48 hours?
Yeah, now, just right off the top, I got to say, I have not been told that anything is final. I have not been told that he is definitely going to be with the team this fall or is not going to be with the team for sure. But the latest kind of vibes that I've gotten have been more on the positive side. I think there were some conversations that took place over the weekend that started to move things in the right direction. As of the recording of this podcast, we don't know yet. They've not had that. I think they're having a team meeting Monday night once players are back together and kind of prepare for the start of camp with that meeting. So we'll see if he's there. We'll see what happens there. We've kind of touched on GoVols247 that, if you've not followed our reporting on this, that there are things that Boo Carter was not handling the way he was supposed to throughout the summer, not showing up for workouts, things of that nature. And that led to a confrontation with teammates, and that kind of, things kind of went from there. And the relationship between Boo Carter and Tennessee was not in a great spot. Boo was away from the team for more than a week without working out. I don't believe has worked out with the team since the middle of the week of SEC media days. So almost 2 weeks since he last worked out with the team, from my understanding. And so we'll see if he's back with the team Monday night. We'll see if he's ready to go on the practice field this week. But whatever he does, I would expect there to be some sort of, punishment, whatever he has to deal with. It may be just something internal. It may be, he loses his starting job to start the season. It could involve a number of things, but I would say there are some things he's going to have to do to earn his way back. But there have been some positive vibes that suggest that it's very possible this gets worked out. So we'll see where this goes over the next day or so. And I think Josh Heupel will probably have some sort of way of addressing that situation when he speaks with the media on Tuesday.
And as you mentioned, we'll have updates galore, all things Boo Carter on GoVols247.com and on the checkerboard. So make sure you're locked in there for the latest on the Boo Carter situation. Patrick, as you and Ryan made your way to SEC Media Days 2 weeks ago, and you're gearing up for fall camp, you're gearing up for it just like Joey Aguilar is. What have you gathered on kind of Joey's transition to Rocky Top and how he's meshing with his new teammates? Obviously, there were a lot of comments from his teammates at SEC Media Days that kind of made you raise your eyebrow. And just what have you heard and what are you gathering in terms of how he's been able to adjust given this roller coaster of an offseason that he's had?
Yeah, I've heard good things, Ben. It kind of like what you touched on at SEC Media Days. A lot of talk about him, even though he wasn't there. He hasn't really done any interviews that since he's committed back in April. Now he will talk on Tuesday at Media Day, Tennessee's sort of MO in these situations. And even when they haven't, is to have all the quarterbacks go. So we'll hear from Joey Aguilar, from Jake Merklinger and George McIntyre on Tuesday. And as sort of we discussed in this podcast before, we'll see how much of a competition it is. And the first practice on Wednesday, I believe, is going to be the day that we're going to get to see more than we usually do. It's usually the first or second practice that there's at least a couple of team periods that we get to see. It's almost like I don't know, maybe it is intentional, but it's almost like a teaser of like, here's what we do when we kick you out after 2 periods or 3 periods or 15 minutes or whatever it is. So we'll see if he's working. Do they throw him with the first team offense right away? A lot of times they've sort of made new guys sort of work their way up, but it's just different at quarterback. That's just kind of how it is. I mean, I would think if you want Joey Aguilar to be your starting quarterback, you would plug him in with the ones as soon as you could, and see, and we'll have to see what they do in terms of splitting up those responsibilities and those reps, and even if Josh Heupel is even going to reveal anything about what that plan is. So, but I think Aguilar has done a good job. I think he's done what he's needed to do this summer. He's come in, he's put his head down, he's worked. I think he took advantage of the time he got here in May, where he had a couple of weeks where he was here and the team was not entirely here. That was his chance to sort of dive into learning the offense. They went over the spring installs with him, which they, again, kind of went back over when the team was back in June as a whole team. So he's sort of gotten a couple things there. And then, as we heard really a lot from Miles Kitselman and some of the other guys at SEC Media Days, he's just been really open with hanging with his teammates. He's really maybe not said no to a lot of, hey, do you want to come hang out? Hey, we're going to the pool. Hey, we're doing this. And I'm sure he's done a lot of workouts too with the skill players and the other quarterbacks as well. So everything's good so far. I think my biggest question for Aguilar going into this camp is does he do what myself and a lot of other people think, and that's kind of sort of run and take this job, or does it linger? Does he struggle a little bit? Are there some initial growing pains there? So as he sort of learns a new team and a new offense, so we'll have to see. But I think the returns over the summer are good, but now he's just got to go out there and win the job in camp.
Ryan, what have you heard in terms of Joey's transition? I'll quickly add that I find it interesting. There was a story on The Athletic from Bruce Feldman, I guess it was last week, about how UCLA landed Nico Iamaleava. And from the Tennessee perspective, it comes off very much as a fluff piece for Nico and his family, if I'm giving my brutally honest opinion, but that's a separate conversation for a separate day. But there was a note in that story from Bruce that I wanted to bring up, and it was Deshaun Foster, and the story is kind of laying out how UCLA got in touch with Nico, how Nico ended up committing, signing, so on and so forth, and there's a note in there where I'm paraphrasing because I don't have it right in front of me, but Deshaun Foster, the UCLA coach, was kind of questioning Joey's commitment to watching film midway through spring. And I believe the other nugget that was in there was kind of questioning whether or not he was putting in the extra work with his receivers and doing all that he needs to in order to gel with his new teammates. And I read the story last night, actually, and it just kind of, I was surprised to see that, because everything that we've heard since Joey has gotten to Tennessee, everything that Patrick just talked about, it's been the total opposite of what Deshaun Foster was claiming with that little nugget in that story.
Yeah, and same here. So, like you said, it's hard to make much of a story like that sometimes because you're obviously only getting one side of it. So, would Joey Aguilar push back on some of that? I would imagine he would. And yeah, sometimes you're, in a position of a coach like Deshaun Foster, you're probably somewhat trying to justify the move. It probably looks like a pretty cutthroat move. I don't think anybody blames UCLA for taking a shot at a 5-star quarterback who's former 5-star prospect who was a local star, essentially in Southern California. But for them to make that move and bring in a guy to be a starter, and then a few months later essentially push him out the door, maybe they feel there's some sort of need to internally justify that move, and so maybe you take whatever shred of a complaint about him you might have and turn it into a big thing. So there might be a kernel of truth in there somewhere, but it could be exaggerated at the very least. Who knows? So, but yeah, no, I've heard nothing about Joey Aguilar during his time at Tennessee that would align with that. And frankly, he's in a stage of this process that I would be shocked if we did hear anything like that. He's he's getting he's drinking from a fire hose at this point. It's just he's got to learn so much about this system, about everything Tennessee does, and he's got to. I mean, this has been pointed out multiple times over the past few months, but he's got to learn. He's learning a third new offense in essentially a little more than a year because he had a new coaching staff at Appalachian State last year, and then he goes to UCLA, learns a new offense there, and then has to learn this new offense at Tennessee. So can he keep the verbiage separate and know everything that he needs to for this system and not get tripped up on any of the things he was doing at UCLA this spring? There's a lot that goes into all that. In addition to, being the leader, carrying yourself like the starting quarterback, all the things that you want to do if you're going to win this job. As far as it being a competition, I'm kind of with Patrick in the sense that we'll see how much of a competition it really is. But we've been around Josh Heupel long enough at this point. I fully expect this to play out throughout preseason camp. I don't think there will be a starter named no matter what. Even if Aguilar runs away with this job, I don't think there will be a starter named until game week at the very least. And Josh Heupel is going to say as little as possible about it all throughout camp. So it's going to feel like a real competition, regardless of whether it is one. I think that's if you want to know where things really stand, it's going to have to come from us gathering from sources how this is looking behind closed doors. It's not going to come from Josh Heupel coming out and saying, well, battle's over in week 2. Joey's got it. He's just going to keep things open because he loves competition. And especially with Aguilar coming in May, as he said at SEC Media Days, it's got to look to the rest of the team. It's got to be obvious that whoever wins this job truly earned it.
Yeah, and the line from that story that I was referencing, to quote it exactly from Bruce Feldman in his story on The Athletic, UCLA had brought in Appalachian State transfer quarterback Joey Aguilar last winter in hopes he could spark the offense, but halfway through spring, Foster wasn't sold on his quarterback's connection to the receivers and his film study habits. And like I said, I read that last night, and I was shocked that was in there because that is not at all what we've heard on the Tennessee side since he has arrived. And in fact, it's been the polar opposite. And I'm reading this on the heels of Miles Kitzelman's quotes and everything that Patrick touched on earlier. So again, if I'm being totally honest, I do think that was a Nico fluff piece. No disrespect to Bruce. I think he does a phenomenal job, but there's a lot of things in that story that made me kind of tilt my head and raise my eyebrows and say, I don't know about that one, Bruce, but we will see. Ryan, do you have something else you'd like to add?
I was going to say, that's just vague enough. See, that's a perfect reference for a coach to kind of slide something in there that sounds like a criticism, but doesn't even have to be really on the surface. That for instance, and obviously I don't know that situation, but that could be something as simple as, okay, you're doing the requisite amount of film watching, but I think you should be doing more because you're the starting quarterback, or you need to be watching film with your receivers or whatever little thing. I think you could be doing something extra. And then on top of that, I don't see the connection with the receivers during practices. So I'm worried about that. So it sounds like he's not doing enough when really it could just be a coach sort of nitpicking and expecting a lot from his quarterback. And again, that comes off to me as just sort of justification for making a pretty cutthroat move that, let's be honest, they've got to be worried this could backfire on them. What if Nico comes in and he's not really that much better because the talent around him is not awesome, and then Aguilar goes to Tennessee and throws 30 touchdowns this year for the third straight year? What is that going to look like? So maybe it's a little bit of, okay, here's why we're making that move, because we got to justify it on two fronts.
Patrick, what are your thoughts on the timeline for when Heupel needs to announce a starting quarterback? And when I say announce, I'm not necessarily saying publicly, but the team, and it will go hand in hand, don't get me wrong. Like if you tell the team that it's going to get out, especially at a place like Tennessee. But what are your thoughts on the timeline? Because I think that Monday of Syracuse week, I think whoever is the starting quarterback, it needs to be known that person is the starting quarterback going into that first game week. Whether he wants to say it publicly on that Monday, that's a different conversation. I don't care when he announces it formally to the public, but at least the team, I think, needs to know going into game week who their quarterback is going to be.
Yeah, I think the team will know both because they're going to see it, right? Like kind of like Heupel talked about and Ryan touched on, that the team needs to know who earned it, right? They don't want some guy to come in and be given a starting spot at that position in particular. So I would say I mean, their second scrimmage is around August 15th, I believe. So I would say by then, behind the scenes, the staff, or they should have a pretty good idea who their quarterback's going to be, and it should be apparent to the team too at that point. And maybe it's sooner, or maybe it's maybe not as settled as they want it to be by then. In terms of going public, though, that's as Ryan touched on, there's really no benefit for Josh Heupel to do it anytime soon. It could be after that scrimmage. It could be game week. I think you also have to take into account that Syracuse is going to have an open situation at quarterback too, with Ricky Collins from transfer from LSU that they named the starter in the spring, but then they bring in Steve Angeli from Notre Dame in the spring portal window. So if Syracuse is also not saying, if Fran Brown's not up there saying who their quarterback's going to be, then there's going to be some gamesmanship too, because since he's not opening with, no disrespect to Chattanooga, but they're not opening with that kind of a tune-up game. They're opening up with a non-conference game against a team that finished ranked and won 10 games last season. So yes, obviously Syracuse has undergone a lot of changes from last season, but again, like Ryan said, I think there's really no. He's going to be vague. He's going to lift both guys up. He's going to say the competition's good, and there are benefits to doing that. There's the gamesmanship, but you also want to keep those guys engaged. You don't want Jake Merklinger, if he's, you don't want him feeling discouraged because, he may not be the starter to open the season, but he's going to be one snap away if he's the backup. So you want to keep that guy engaged. You want to keep him on edge. You want to keep him pushing. You want to keep Joey Aguilar going too. So, and that's something that Miles Kitzman talked about at SEC Media Days, is that when you're an established starter, you have to sometimes guard against complacency. And he's even talked about having to do that himself at tight end. So, none of those quarterbacks are in the position, in a situation to do that. And certainly coaching staff isn't going to want, if they say after a week, it's clear cut, Joey's our guy or whatever, they may not want that to be known, just because they want to keep everybody on edge and pushing as hard as they can and competing and doing some of that extra work that he was allegedly not doing, I guess, at UCLA with some of those comments. So I'll see if that gets brought up to Joey when he talks on Tuesday and what he says about that. That'll be interesting to see if he's got any response to his former coach that he played for out in LA.
Oh, I'll bring it up to him if no one else does.
Professor Callahan, we have all the belief in you, my friend. We know how important the quarterback position is, right? It's arguably the most important position in all of sports. So with that understanding, Patrick, is that the position storyline on offense you'll most be paying attention to this fall camp / do you think that is the position on that side of the ball that will be most critical to Tennessee's success this season, given what we know what the importance of the position is, but in terms of the personnel that Tennessee has, do you feel like that's the position that needs to have the strongest fall on that side of fall camp, on that side of the ball?
I'd probably go no. I'm going to be more interested maybe not more interested. That's not the right word. I'm going to be, what happens with the wide receivers, because the other part of the connection there with whoever the quarterback is that he's going to need some guys out there making plays for him. I think Tennessee's been lacking that the last couple seasons. They haven't, I think, adequately replaced a couple dudes they had in Jalen Hyatt and Cedric Tillman. Maybe things go differently if Brew McCoy doesn't have that ankle injury in 23 against South Carolina. Obviously, Dante Thornton had a great season last year, but he was sort of a big play guy or bust. So who are going to be those guys that are going to make those plays on the perimeter? I think that's the big question. There's other parts of this offense. There's just so many unknowns, but I think to me that, you want to see some signs at receiver that some of these young guys, some of this young talent that you're banking on. I mean, you could have gone more aggressive in the portal if you wanted to in the winter and the spring, and you didn't, because you wanted to see these guys get their chance to see what they do with it. Now, what do they do with it? What does Mike Matthews look like this fall? What does Braylon Staley do this fall? Can they stay healthy there? I think that's a big question. I think they saw some good things from Travis Smith Jr. and Rodarius Jackson in the spring. Can they continue to do that? Have they built over the summer to be ready to play? Because, could they potentially trim the rotation to just play the starters every meaningful snap? Potentially, but at some point they're probably going to need Travis Smith and Rodarius Jackson to go out there and play and fill in and have the offense and the receiver position not skip a beat. Haven't mentioned Chris Browsley. He's a guy that, can he take a jump? Can he sort of settle in that second season? We'll see. And then you even look at a guy like Joakim Dotson, who just got here in the summer. I mean, he could be a factor as well. Is Amari Jefferson healthy after the spring when he didn't really look healthy? So a lot of questions at that position. You want to see some of these guys make plays in practice. You want to see them make plays in the scrimmages. That would be an encouraging sign if those guys are showing up and making some plays, because they're going to be going against some pretty good defensive backs. Even if, we'll see what happens with Boo Carter. We'll see what they do with Jerron McCoy, but those guys should get tested pretty good every day, going against Colton Hood, going against Ricky Gibson. Jalen McMurray's a guy that's played a lot of football on that side of the ball. So those guys should get better in those matchups, but you want to see them make those plays and help the quarterback out, whether it's Joey, whether it's Jake, whoever it is. Those guys have got to step up and they've got to make plays. And I think the big question there for me is are those guys showing that they're ready to go out there and get it done on Saturdays? Because it's a big jump. I mean, there's not a lot of experience behind the top 3 projected starters, and even 2 of those starters are second-year guys that caught 10 passes last season. So it's a big question mark, but a lot of talent there, and Tennessee's banking on it, and you want to see signs that it's ready over the next few weeks.
I'm glad we've got some variety in our answers here, because I would lean a little more toward the offensive line if there's a position aside from quarterback being the one that really has to be sorted out and sorted out pretty quickly. We've covered enough of these offensive line competitions. You always have the question of, much like you were asking, Ben, when do you need to know your starting 5? When do those guys need to start to mesh together? That's something you got to figure out with those first couple of scrimmages, especially to sort of know what is your best starting 5. And they've had the offseason up to this point to do that and to experiment with different combinations. But I don't know that they've found what they're going to go with to start the season just yet. So you've got to figure out. I think it all starts with the center position. Is it William Satterwhite? Is it Sam Pendleton? Is it someone else? I don't think they've quite found the answer yet, at least not completely. And that's a little bit concerning, frankly, if you're this far into the offseason and you've not sorted out who's going to be your starting center, because I think that's in part because things haven't been completely smooth with whoever's been out there. So, and we've seen in the past, Cooper Mays played here for a long time, and the times he was not out there, it was a different looking offense a lot of times. So you've got to get that position right, and things tend to fall into place elsewhere on the offensive line when the center position gets it right. When the center position's a problem, it can bog down an entire offensive line. So I think that's really important for Tennessee. I think this is a more talented, or at least an offensive line that has a higher ceiling in terms of talent than what they had last year. So I understand there have been some concerns about that unit the whole year. I think this offensive line has the potential to be pretty good. If Lance Hurd takes the step that he can, if David Sanders is good for a freshman, you would assume he's going to have some bumps in the road. But with Larry Johnson no longer around, he's going to have a pretty clear path to the starting job at right tackle now. Those guys, I think, have a chance to be pretty good this year. At guard, Wendell Moy Jr. is going to be one of those guys. Should be pretty good, I think, based on what we've heard so far. Not a guy that's going to maybe dominate. We'll see about that, but I think he's going to be a solid guy they can count on. And then so that leaves those other 2 spots, center and potentially right guard, whatever, however they decide to move things around. Is Sham Umarov part of that answer? Is Jesse Perry part of the answer there? Where do they end up going, and what's the working combination that gives them their best 5? Because if you don't get that right up front, that can cause problems for whoever your quarterback is. It can cause problems for your passing game. We certainly saw that last year. As I've told people about what Nico did and didn't do last year, as we've kind of reflected on that whole situation, you have to include, well, he didn't have the best offensive line help in front of him sometimes. He didn't have the best receiver help around him. So that affects everything. You got to keep that run game on track too. So I'm really interested. Obviously, quarterback's important, but I'm really interested in what's going to happen at the center and guard positions in particular on the offensive line.
I am as well. And now my answer is the same as Patrick's, the receiver position. I like the talent in the room. I just kind of feel like that. I feel like the talent is a year away just because they are so young. I trust Mike Matthews. I think he's going to have a strong year. But who else is going to be able to step up and help him out? Now, I do think on the positive side of that answer, I really like Tennessee's tight end room. And theoretically, Miles Kitselman, Ethan Davis, maybe one of the young guys can help that receiver group out and give whoever the quarterback is more targets, more weapons than we are anticipating, to where the receiver room does not have to shoulder the load. But I agree with Patrick's sentiment that that group just has not been good enough the last couple of years. You've had a couple of guys here and there that were fine, but it just has not been good enough to help out Joe Milton, to help out Nico Iamaleava, and somebody's going to have to step up in a big way in addition to Mike Matthews to help out whoever wins the starting job. And the reason my answer shifted from Ryan's to Patrick's from the spring to the fall is because of the addition of Sam Pendleton and Wendell Moy. I think those two guys are going to prove to be two of the more valuable players on the team. And I don't think enough people are talking about Wendell Moy. I think he's going to have a big-time season for Tennessee. Quickly, before we catch a break, are you more – we'll start with Ryan since he brought up the offensive line. More trust in left tackle or center?
Left tackle, and it's not even close right now. I think center is I don't want to cause people too much alarm, but I think there's been enough that's happened throughout the spring and the summer that I think that's really a position you've got to solidify during preseason camp, because it's not, that's the tricky part about center. It's about running the offense at the tempo you want. And we'll see again how much of a part of this offense that tempo is. I know there was a lot of hand wringing about that last year. Is this even going to be a tempo offense anymore and all that stuff? But if you're going to do that, the center's got to lead the charge on that. You've got to have the snaps right, and then you've got to be an effective blocker. If you're not good in all those areas, things can go awry. So I think that's a key spot. They've got to get that right. And I think William Satterwhite is the guy that I heard about most recently getting work with the first team unit. We'll see if that remains the case, but he was kind of the guy that got the first shot in the spring. At times early in the summer, I heard it might be Sam Pendleton getting some work there. We'll see if they mix and match and try some different things there, or how they approach that. But whoever it is, they've got to figure out somebody that can be pretty effective at that position. I think Lance Hurd's had a pretty good offseason, and hearing him talk in the spring, he kind of attributed some of his issues last year to injuries. So, is that entirely what happened? I think there were probably some other factors at least, but you kind of maybe give him the benefit of the doubt a little bit, considering he looks to be in better shape this offseason, and he's always been a talented guy. So I think he'll be solid, at least at left tackle. At center, I have more questions right now about how good that position is going to be and who it's going to be.
Yeah, I don't think we got to see the real Lance Hurd last season. There were some things working against him with I think he had the knee procedure in the offseason that really I don't think he did a whole lot in camp. So that got him, you never want to really play your way into shape, but that was just an ill-timed situation for him. And then, he had the ankle injury too early in the season. So he was playing through a couple things, and he was pretty insistent on that in the spring, that I haven't really gotten to show what I am. So there's been some good vibes there. He's got to go out and prove it, obviously, and he's got to stay healthy. But with Satterwhite, I think the question is they've talked about how sharp he is mentally. I think it's the physical part that he's still sort of getting a handle on. And that's typical for a young player, right? I mean, I think he said in the spring that came in around 270, was at around 310. So he's done a good job in the weight room. But a lot of these centers come in, they didn't play center in high school. So how much did they snap? That's something you got to get down first. It takes a lot of repetition and time to get it to be second nature for a lot of guys. So got to execute that. And then you got to execute, your assignment as well. And then, so we'll see if he can put that all together. But I would agree with Ryan that left tackle is the better position of those two, Ben.
We need to catch a quick timeout here on the podcast, but on the other side, we're going to come back and we're going to talk defense. But before we talk defense, I'm going to ask Patrick and Ryan which player they are most excited to watch this fall camp, and which player needs to have a big fall camp to help their stock on the depth chart. And we will talk about that on the other side of this quick timeout here on the GoVols247 Podcast. Welcome back into the GoVols247 Podcast. I am Ben McKee, and I'm joined by Patrick Brown and Ryan Callahan on this Monday, July 28th edition, our fall camp preview podcast here at GoVols247.com. And before we jump back into our conversation, if you wouldn't mind going into wherever you find our GoVols247 Podcast, whichever streaming service you use, if you wouldn't mind leaving us a review, we would greatly appreciate that. And of course, as we always like to mention, if there's a Tennessee fan in your life who's excited for fall camp, they're looking for more Tennessee football conversation, if you wouldn't mind sending us in their direction, we would greatly appreciate that. Patrick, we'll ask them to you at the same time. Who is the player that you're most excited to watch this fall camp on offense? Who's the player who needs to have a big fall camp to help their order on the depth chart?
I will say the player I'm most excited to watch on offense it's got to be David Sanders, right? I'm admittedly a stargazer, so he's got the most stars next to his name. Top 5 recruit in the composite era, something like that. So, and he's going to be the starting right tackle unless something goes very differently. So, I would expect people just say, yeah, he's not going to be perfect. No freshman offensive lineman or freshman offensive tackle is. There might be some rough games. There might be some rough stretches. There will be moments he looks like a freshman, but if he's able to play through those and keep the confidence up and sort of get his footing and improve throughout the year, that's the best case scenario. I think he's had a great offseason. He talked in the spring about getting here at 270 pounds. He was up to 290 by the start of spring ball, which is where he wanted to be. He wanted to get to 300, 305 for the start of preseason. The new roster that came out a couple weeks ago had him at 305. That sounds pretty accurate based on what we've heard. So I think he's done everything he's needed to do this offseason. Now he's just got to go out there and sort of get thrown in the fire and see how he goes. Player needs to help himself the most. I'm going to touch on the running backs, and I don't know that it's necessarily one player, but that's a competition that's going to get overshadowed by quarterback, by the other position we talked about, wide receiver and offensive line. But that's a very interesting competition because you've got a lot of guys there that have something to prove, whether it's Deshaun Bishop with the constant, he's not a walk-on now, but he's still got that mentality. Peyton Lewis is he's going to want to show that he can be a lead back. This is the last season for Sar Thomas that's getting a shot in the SEC after playing at New Mexico State and Duke. And then DeJuan Morris, who is an exciting freshman that I feel like he's going to get in the mix somehow this season. I don't know how. I don't know if it's special teams. I don't know if it's on offense, but Darrell Sims in that position, that's going to be one of those positions where none of those guys, if you twist your ankle, you're not going to want to spend too much time getting it treated on the sideline, because if you miss a few days of practice, you might end up behind somebody. That's how that position could go. That's how it should be a lot of positions. And you lose a guy like Dylan Sampson. We haven't even touched on him. He's SEC Player of the Year last season, and there's other positions and question marks on this offense, but there's that one too. But I think they've got a pretty good set of options. It should be a little bit more by committee, but that's a position that I think as a whole, all those guys need to help themselves because they're all fighting for a finite number of plays, carries, snaps, and all those things. And they're probably going to need all those guys. That's going to be the easy answer when we talk to Heupel, when we talk to Darrell Sims. We're going to need 3 or 4 guys throughout the season because that's sort of a wear and tear position. But I think that's one where none of those guys are going to have bad days, right, in camp, because if you're having a bad day, someone else might be having a good day, and a couple more of those, and you might be further down the depth chart than you want to be. So that'll be my pick there.
I'd be lying if I didn't go with the obvious answer here. I'm most excited to see Joey Aguilar because this offense. I mean, I understand where the concern has been all offseason. I understand why there's some people around the country who are picking Tennessee, and I don't agree with it, but why they're picking to finish 9th, 10th, 11th in the SEC, because they know what they saw from Tennessee on offense last year. They know they've got 3 returning starters on offense, and they know that quarterback's now not one of them, and that you have a major question mark there in Joey Aguilar, who has put up some nice numbers in the past at Appalachian State, but has not done it at this level. And is it going to translate to the SEC? So just because we haven't seen it in this offense, I'm really interested in seeing what it looks like. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of attention on every throw he makes during the open portions of practice. Just how does it look, and can he make all the throws that you see enough on film from his time at Appalachian State that I think that the ability to do what's needed at that position is definitely there. It's just a matter of, can he do it consistently? Is the accuracy consistent? And is the decision-making good? And obviously what we hear from the scrimmages will be of the most interest. But yeah, all that, I think that's, for obvious reasons, this offense has got to click better in the passing game than it did last year, bottom line. As far as the depth chart, there's not a lot that's up for grabs, interestingly, besides the offensive line, and we've already kind of touched on that. So I'll go a little bit down the depth chart. I'm interested in the freshman tight ends. Desan Brame, Jack Van Dorselaer, one of those guys might be needed to step forward this year to kind of give Tennessee a third tight end in some situations. who's it going to be? Cole Harrison, I think, is a second-year guy that maybe had the inside track, but he's not been completely healthy this offseason, and maybe kept him from being able to make the most of his opportunity to kind of have the inside track there. So, Desan Brame, obviously he was a really highly ranked prospect coming out of high school. Van Dorsel there, a 4-star himself. Can either of those guys find their way onto the field right away? And for that matter, I'm interested in seeing how Ethan Davis looks. He's got a big opportunity to maybe be the starter while Miles Kitselman comes back from that injury if he's not fully ready for game one. How has he come along? We've heard a lot about his progression, but as far as guys that really need to push their way up the depth chart, I think those 2 freshman tight ends are really interesting this during camp, because you don't know for sure what Cole Harrison's status is going to be, and there's a real need for someone, especially if Miles Kitselman misses a game or two to start the year, someone to emerge as a second tight end that they can count on.
Well, and to go off of your answer, Ryan, I think Ethan Davis and Chris Brazzell are the 2 offensive players that need to have the strongest fall camps to help their positioning on the depth chart. And it's because of what you just talked about with the tight end room, what Patrick was talking about earlier with the receivers, the young receivers. I mentioned that I like the receiver room. I just kind of think it's a year or 2 away because it's so young and inexperienced. But there's a lot of talent there. And I think it's kind of now or never for both Ethan Davis and Chris Brazzell. And if they aren't ready to go from the jump, then because of the talent behind both of those guys, I could see a scenario where if it's the same old with those guys, then a young guy quickly passing them up on the depth chart. So those 2 guys would be my choice for which offensive players need to have a strong fall camp. And then in terms of the player I'm most excited for to watch, other than Joey Aguilar or the quarterback position, I think it would be Mike Matthews. Mike Matthews or Wendell Moy are the first 2 names that come to mind. I just love me a good Polynesian lineman. I mean, it's that simple, right? Like I think of Jesse Mahalona and guys like that. Like that's who I grew up watching, and Jesse Mahalona was one of my favorite players, and there's so many others as well, right? But I just love the anger that they play with. My left guard for the Pittsburgh Steelers right now is Isaac Salamalu, something along those lines. I butchered that, of course, but I just love the way the Polynesian players play. It's why Jackson Moy is one of probably my favorite player on the team, just because I love the passion that he plays with and everything he stands for. And he's an easy fan favorite. And so that's why I would say Wendell Moy. And then Mike Matthews, I mean, former 5-star, kind of what Patrick was talking about earlier with David Sanders Jr., highly ranked recruit. It's always fun to watch those guys. And although I'm a little hesitant to buy into the overall production of the receiver room this year, I can see Mike Matthews very much having a strong individual season, and I think Tennessee needs him to. So I would say he is the player on offense I'm most excited to watch this fall camp outside of the quarterback position. Patrick, what storyline on defense are you most paying attention to heading into camp?
Well, I think it's got to be the secondary, just because even regardless of what happens with Boo Carter, as we touched on at the top of the podcast, they've got to sort some things out there. And Boo's situation is obviously another huge layer to that, because he's, what you've been thinking all offseason, he's going to be your starting star. So that's an important position in this defense. It's been a productive position in this defense. So, but then you've also got Jermod McCoy coming off an ACL injury. So what are how are you holding that position down for however long he's not on the field? So I think that's a position where they've got to get some things sorted out. And it's not, they seem to have a pretty good amount of depth there, but then, the safety position loses 3 guys in the spring. So they're going to be throwing some new faces in there. Some younger guys are going to get a chance there. I think that it's good they have Ricky Gibson. I think I should start there. He had a pretty good season last year. I'm sure he's hungry this year to show that he's just as good as McCoy, who's gotten a lot of offseason pub as a first-round pick, top cornerback in the draft next year. So, being alongside a guy like that can have really good effects on you. Just look at what Josh Josephs did last season with Pierce. So, I think Jalen McMurray is going to play a role in this football team at cornerback. I think he's got the versatility to help them at star if needed. Maybe that's as the backup for Boo. Maybe it's maybe he's the guy there if Boo's out of the picture. And then another guy there that we've heard a lot about this offseason is Colton Hood coming in from Colorado. Now, he was a backup at Colorado, but he played a ton between defense and special teams, and heard some good things about him. I mean, Arion Carter's bringing him up unprompted at SEC Media Days. He's going to play a big role in this team. I don't know if he's going to be, if there's no Boo, is it going to be McMurray at star? Could it be Colton Hood at star and Hood at corner with, until McCoy gets back? And then, they've got to figure all this out. And certainly the situation with Boo Carter is a part of that as well. And then, just the safeties, obviously you've got Andre Turrentine back there, but Idris Farouk was one of the most improved players in the spring defensively. So he should get a shot there, but Caleb Beasley, I think, is going to play too. So, and he played was a cornerback last season. They moved him to star and safety this spring. It seemed like a puzzling move given that you just lost Jabad McCoy. So it's like, why would you move a guy from corner where you're after the first three guys, you're really young? But I think Beasley took that move pretty well, and I like what they saw on the field. So I think he's going to be a guy that's going to get on the field there, and potentially at star too. So but that's the thing. They've got to sort all that out. Where is Boo Carter in this situation? What is Jermod McCoy's involvement this spring? How much do they get out of him? I would think they would be pretty cautious with him early and maybe throughout fall camp, just to see. They don't want to rush him back and have a setback. That would be the worst case scenario for him and for Tennessee, given what potentially could be down the road for him. So, but they've got to sort all those positions out and figure out who their best five are, and then who the 6th, 7th, and 8th guys are across those 5 positions in the secondary.
For me, I definitely agree. Overall, it's the secondary. I think there's like Patrick said, a lot of layers to it. One of which is obviously how long is Jermod McCoy going to be out? What's his recovery look like? The more I've heard about this the past couple weeks, and this has even changed since the start of the summer, the more I think Tennessee is now taking a little bit more of a cautious approach to this. That maybe October is a more realistic goal for Jermod McCoy to come back. And if that's the case, you're preparing for a pretty lengthy absence without one of your best players on defense. So, and I think one of the reasons they're able to take that kind of approach, and you have to, because Jermod McCoy, let's face it, he probably doesn't have to play a bunch of games this year. He could live off a lot of what he did last year. If he just comes back and shows he's good coming off that ACL injury and played 3 games at the end of the year, that'd probably be enough for a lot of NFL teams. So I think you don't have to rush him back, and he might want it that way. But whatever the case, I think Tennessee feels good about it because you have Colton Hood. I think that's changed their outlook a little bit to that position, knowing that you have someone like him who's capable of stepping in beyond Jalen McMurray. And just to have that third guy without Jermod McCoy change the calculus a little bit, because you've got otherwise freshmen and a second-year guy in Marcus Gorey behind them at corner. And then Patrick alluded to it. I think that's a competition between Idris Farouk and Caleb Beasley. I think Caleb Beasley has a chance. It may not be a great one, but has a chance to win that starting job if he had a good enough camp. I do think Farouk has the inside track, though, and it would take a lot. But I think Caleb Beasley is going to be a big factor on defense for Tennessee, most likely just as the third safety, because behind him there's really nobody else who's shown they can be counted on. But I think Caleb Beasley is going to play a lot of football this year, and I think Tennessee is pretty excited about what he's done so far. But saying all that, just to give another different answer here, I think it's the pass rush. I think this is an underrated storyline for Tennessee. Do they have the pass rush that they even had last year? And last year they ranked 50-something nationally in sacks. For having James Pearson and Omar Norman Light, you would think that number was better, but the sack total still wasn't quite where you'd want it to be ideally. And you've got to replace those guys. So how good is Joshua Josephs? He graded out really well. He did not have a big sack total last year. How good is Caleb Herring? They've talked a lot about him internally. A lot of people excited about Caleb Herring behind the scenes. Can he do it, though? We've not seen him play more than 8 or 10 snaps a game for the most part. So what does he look like? Is Jordan Ross going to be a factor on this team? And beyond that, can they find some interior pass rush? Is Jackson Moy capable of providing some of that to replace what you lost in Omar Norman Lott? Can David Hobbs do it? I think he's a guy that's pretty important to this team. So what's the pass rush look like overall? I think they're going to be really good against the run, but how aggressive are they at getting to the quarterback, and how effective, obviously, are they at getting sacks and making things happen?
And Patrick, to answer our defensive version of the question, which players need to have a strong fall camp, I was going to bring up exactly what Ryan just brought up, because I don't think there's any doubt that the secondary is the biggest storyline going into fall camp, because there's a million storylines packed into one right now with the secondary. There's so much to monitor back there at the moment going into camp. But in terms of the players that need to have the best fall camp to help their positioning on the depth chart, I do think it is that Leo position, specifically the pass rushers. Joshua Josephs has had a fine college career, but is this the year that he finally takes that next step and lives up to the potential that everybody has thought that he possesses? And same for Caleb Herring. Like, when are you going to make some noise in this thing? And Jordan Ross, where are you coming off of injury? Where are you in your development? I think it's a big fall camp for all three of those guys for different individual reasons.
Yeah, I'm going to cheat here, and I'm going to go with sort of a group from a recruiting class on that defensive side. This 2023 recruiting class, I think, was a top 10 class, if I'm remembering correctly. It's like 2/3 of it's gone. They got hit hard. That group, a lot of those guys that weren't playing in the spring or weren't playing through 2 seasons, they left. The Cameron Seldons, the Nathan Leacocks, and then you have Nico leave too. So there's only, I think, about 10 guys left from that class, but a lot of them are on defense. A lot of them are going to have to play important roles. That's the Arion Carter class. He and Jeremiah Thielander are going to be starting linebackers. Can they go from solid first-year starters to impact guys that make plays? Obviously, Arion last season had, I think, 6.5 tackles for loss, 6 pass breakups, had the interception against Florida. Can he elevate and become a true NFL level prospect that he has, I think, potentially out there for him? Then you have guys like Caleb Herring and David Hobbs that Ryan touched on, guys that have played some in Hobbs' case. I mean, these guys had crazy high school film and production and showed a lot of athleticism, but now they're juniors all of a sudden. Time flies, right? Their careers go by really fast, and this is about the time where you want to see some of that development pay off and look like it on the field. Tyree Weathersby, I think, is another one in that class. He's going to be maybe a factor at defensive end. He's finally been healthy this offseason after that injury. So I think that core group has got all those guys have to deliver in some way or the other. So I think those are kind of my combo answer to these questions, right? Like, those are guys that need to have good camps, and it's easy to sort of overlook guys like Arion Carter and Jeremiah Thielander because they're maybe a little bit more established. But I mean, those guys are going to be tone setters for this defense every day. And Tennessee's, I think, internally pretty bullish on what this defense can do. It may not be as deep, but I think they like what they've built there. They like how they've recruited there. I think there's been a pretty good philosophy on that side of the football. They play a lot of guys, I think, has helped too. And I think that's something that they want to continue, just from a staff standpoint of playing 3 and 4 linebackers, playing 10 defensive linemen at least, rotating in the secondary. So I think that's something that benefited them really well last season. I think they want to continue it. They need some guys to come along, but they also need some guys that need to make that jump sort of from contributor, role player, that kind of thing to, okay, you're a guy out there that's, if you're David Hobbs, you're getting 5 sacks this season. If you're Caleb Herring, you're affecting the quarterback when you're on the field consistently. That kind of thing. Those are the guys that I want to see kind of take that next step this season, and I think that starts here over the next few weeks in camp.
Ryan, who's the player on defense you are most excited to watch this camp?
I know who he's going to pick.
Who?
Go ahead. Tell me.
He's going to pick Colton Hood.
Well, I was going to say that would seem like the obvious answer, I think, because he's the new guy and there's been so much talk about him. I think people are probably eager to see what he looks like. And on some level, yes, that's definitely part of the answer. I'm going to take this a different direction, though, because we didn't get to see them this spring. It's going to kind of be a two-headed answer here. I'm going to go with the freshman linebackers, Jaden Harmon and Jaden Perlotti. I think there's an open spot at the back end of that linebacker rotation. We know who the top 3 are going to be: Arion Carter, Jeremiah Thielander, Edwin Spillman. Jordan Burns had a big opportunity this spring to kind of show what he could do after he didn't really get to make any sort of impact as a true freshman. So can one of those true freshmen coming off surgery, at the start of the offseason, can they settle in quickly enough to make themselves a factor right away and earn some early playing time? Can Brendan Ains, for that matter, but the 2 we didn't get to see this spring, were Jaden Harmon and Jaden Perlotti, and there was a lot of excitement about those 2 guys. Harmon in particular was the one that I heard generating some offseason buzz. So can one of those guys show that they're capable of helping right away? Because I mean, let me tell you, if one of those guys is good, Tennessee has a chance to have a pretty deep, nasty linebacker group. I mean, that group has some real talent and depth for the first time in a while. And I think they've had some good players there, but this is on a different level of athleticism and ability if you get those guys to live up to the hype coming out of high school. So I think if Edwin Spillman's a guy that probably isn't being talked about enough, frankly, that people should be pretty excited about. I think there's a lot of excitement internally about what kind of season he could have. If you pair him with a guy like a Harmon or Pilati, if at some point, even if it's not to start the season, if one of those guys kind of earns their way into that rotation at some point, that's a pretty exciting situation. And then if they don't, who's it going to be? Is it going to be Jordan Burns? Is it going to be Brendan Ains? So there's a chance for someone. What we've seen, Tennessee likes to rotate 4 linebackers whenever possible. So will one of those guys step forward? And yeah, since we didn't get to see them this spring, I'm really interested in seeing what Harmon and Pilati do in particular.
Patrick, who is your answer? I would have taken Colton Hood as well, to be fair, just because he is the new piece. And I am really excited to see Arion Carter and Jeremiah Thielander because I do think they're going to take a big step forward this year. Different styles of linebacker, but I think in their own respective ways, I think both are going to have strong years. Excited to see Arion's athleticism, but at the end of the day, my answer is Jackson Moy. Again, he's my favorite player on the team.
Yeah, no, Hood would be my guess, or my pick too, just because I think he's, it's the spring window has been such a non-event for Tennessee. And really the last few cycles, it's sort of been pretty watered down in terms of just what's available. So it's easy to say, well, they got this guy from Colorado. He was a backup. He, didn't work, left Auburn after a year. How good is he? And then, he would have been a good pickup in any window. When you sort of dig into what he did. I mean, I think he played over 300 defensive snaps. He was a backup for Travis Hunter, who obviously didn't, he was playing every time, but Hood held his own against like McMillan and some of those guys at Arizona, and made some plays in some Big 12 games over there. So he wasn't stat padding against nobodies. He was holding his own against, excuse me, some pretty good receivers out there. And, the last time they got a guy like that, nobody knew who Gerard McCoy was. But as a freshman, he was facing, Bo Nix and Michael Penix and all those, some of those guys out there in the Pac-12 RIP that prepared him to be ready for the SEC. And in Hood's case, he actually did spend a season in the SEC at Auburn, redshirted there in 23 out of the Atlanta area. So he was a pretty nice steal there and could turn out to be a guy that plays a lot. And since we haven't seen him since he only got here for the start of summer stuff, he's a guy. He's a newcomer, right? Every time, every spring, every camp, it's always the newcomers that grab a lot of attention that you want to see. And I know he's not the spring edition of note with Joey Aguilar, but I think he's going to be a big factor for this secondary and play a lot for Tennessee. And I think he stylistically is in line with what they have in Gibson and McCoy, an aggressive corner that's athletic that wants to make plays on the football. And I think you can plug him in there and don't have to change a whole lot, and you can trust him to play pretty well.
Quickly, before we get out of here, any special teams storylines that fans need to be aware of heading into fall camp? Either one of you can take this.
Well, to you, as you are to Polynesian players, I am to punters, and especially Aussie punters. So Jackson Ross, I think he's like 26 now. He's back. Last I could check, he can still punt with both feet. If they don't do a fake with him this year, I'm going to be a little upset. They've got new leadership at special teams too, with Evan Crabtree coming in for Mike Eckler, who's now at Nebraska. They brought John Bonamigo in as sort of the veteran counterpart to the young guy that's been here. So that'll be, he's going to want to carry over some things from Eckler, having worked with him for a couple of years. He knows the roster, he knows the personnel and the traits that you can plug into those special team units. But Tennessee's been pretty solid on special teams. I think you want to see that continue, but I gotta give really special teams is, I love Tennessee special teams because they have an Aussie punter and they have a kicker from Memphis. So they're pretty good. That's all you need to say. They got an Aussie punter and a kicker from Memphis. Balls are straight.
Who's the kick returner? That's where I start on this
is
one.
Boo Carter on the team?
Yeah, if Boo Carter's not on the team, you mentioned him earlier, Patrick. If something were to happen and Boo Carter does not stay with the team, I think DeJuan Morris would be one of the first names to watch at punt returner. So that's a guy I like that pick. I think he's going to factor into the running back rotation at some point this year at the back end there. But what does Star Thomas look like? But yeah, on special teams, DeJuan Morris certainly could be an option there on punt returns. On kick returns, I'm not sure what direction they're going to go. And frankly, we didn't get a great look at that during the modified spring game or whatever you want to call it that we got to watch in April when we were all more worried about the quarterback situation as opposed to what was happening on the field. But that was one thing I didn't get to see enough of, and frankly, we'll see kind of how that plays out during fall camp. But yeah, that's a big question. To the extent that you're going to return a lot of kickoffs, in this era, that's something they've got to maybe still answer a little bit. But they've got some good options there. Some guys that did it in high school, and plenty of good athletes on this team. Obviously, it's a pretty deep roster now in year 5 under Josh Heupel. So you've got more athletes to pick from, even though your secondary and your receiver groups are a little bit thinner. You still got plenty of athletes back there who can handle the ball and some running backs too.
Punt return is going to be the bigger deal because Tennessee's defense is going to force more punts and they're probably going to give up touchdowns. Not to mention the philosophical, like, we're just going to take the ball to 25, just let it go, that kind of thing. But if you find the right guy back there, if you find a Velus Jones, then
if you find Evan Berry,
yeah.
Then okay, sure, bring that thing out. But in the meantime, I will say the only thing I would add is I don't know that I want to see Mike Matthews back there because I think his role with the receiver room is going to be so prominent. I don't know that I would be willing to risk his availability unless he is Evan Berry 2.0 back there. Like I'm not trying to risk his availability for the receiver room.
To your point, I think you want it to be a DB. You're too thin at wide receiver, and DB's even thinner than you'd like, probably, right? So I think it needs to be a DB back there. Trey Poteet is one who might be a low-key name to keep an eye on. He was a really good returner in high school. I could see him being part of that discussion. Again, DeJuan Morris has done it. So you've got some options. I think Star Thomas might have some ability to return kicks too. So you've got some guys who have Bishop. That skill set. Bishop has obviously done it before. So you've got some options there. Although, again, I don't think you want your starting running back there too often. But you've got some guys who've done it and have that skill set. So I think you're okay. But I'm with you, Ben. I don't know that whether it's Mike Matthews, Braylon Staley, even one of the freshmen. I don't think you want any freshmen getting hurt on returns this year because you got to have all of those guys at wide receiver this year.
I think Desan Brame returned 3 punts for a touchdown.
He did.
I don't think saying if Boo's not around.
Don't think you're going to see any tight ends returning punts in the SEC, but it's pretty amazing that he did it and did it that well.
I say put Arion Carter back there. Just let him run over everybody. Hey, he was committed to Memphis as a running back. So let's show off his athleticism. Patrick, it's going to be a busy week number 1 of fall camp. What can folks expect from our coverage this week at GoVols247.com? What do you have coming down the pike?
I'll have some preview content here rest of Monday into Tuesday, and then obviously a lot of media day coverage. We'll have whatever is said about Boo Carter and whatever his situation is. We'll have coverage of that. I'm looking forward to talking to Joey Aguilar for the first time. I'm sure that will be the distribution of media members at those chairs will be interesting, and hopefully Jake Merklinger and George McIntyre don't feel some type of way with
that. Will be our local version of the Arch Manning Media Circus at SEC Media Days. That'll be Joey Aguilar's chair.
Which means I'll be talking to George or Jake.
Yeah, just make sure they don't take it personally. Hey, he's not been here. We talked to you guys. We talked to you guys in the spring. You guys are old news. Not really, but and even McIntyre's a guy that what does he do this camp? Because I don't know if he's going to be a huge factor in the competition, but it's still an important time for him because if Aguilar is the starter, he's not going to be here next season. You got Faison Brandon coming in. But yeah, we'll have a full coverage of that. We'll have some other players that we're talking to on Tuesday, and then Wednesday will be the first day of practice. We will have video highlights from what we see, lots of observations. Again, I think that first day is the day we get more than the 2 or 3 periods, so should have plenty of notes. Usually that section, those practices have included some one-on-ones and also some actual team periods where we can see who's with the 1s, 2s, and 3s, which it's only the first day, and it's probably more of a reflection of how they ended spring, but still notable nonetheless. And then I think they practice Thursday as well. So it's here.
Yep. Here's your schedule for the week. Tuesday's media day. Josh Heupel will speak at 12:45. Then Tim Banks will speak. Then Joey Halsley will speak. And then we'll have a bunch of players after that. Jake Merklinger, George McIntyre, Joey Aguilar, Deshaun Bishop, Lance Hurd, Dominic Bailey, Jackson Moy, Ricky Gibson, Andre Turrentine, and Jeremiah Thielander. Josh Heupel will speak along with freshman players after practice number 1 on Wednesday. Thursday, Alec Ablin and freshman players will speak after practice number 2. And then on practice number 1 on Wednesday, we get the first 6 periods to watch. And then on Thursday, we get the first 4 periods to watch. And then off day on Friday. And then Saturday, we get to watch warm-ups in the first period. And then we'll talk to William Inge and select defensive players.
I look forward to Ben's exclusive Q&A with Jackson Moy. That's what I look forward to.
I can't wait. It's going to be electric, just like he is electric. And it's always an electric time to sign up for GoVols247.com, Mr. Callahan.
That's right. $1 for the first month gets you in the door right now. We'll have an upcoming sale, I will say, to announce soon that people will want to take advantage of. That's not on the site just yet, but keep an eye on that with the start of preseason camp and everything. But yeah, great time to join the site. No better time to be on GoVols 24/7 than right now. And yeah, still some recruiting news to keep an eye on as well. But definitely it's football time, and obviously with all our daily coverage, Patrick's observations, which will be more than worth the price of admission on Wednesday for day 1, right? That's always your favorite one of the year to write. So much to cover this first week, especially as Tennessee gets ready for the first scrimmage, and you'll want to be there every step of the way to track the quarterback competition and more.
For Patrick Brown and Ryan Callahan, I'm Ben McKee. This has been another edition of the GoVols 24/7 Podcast.